Marcus Thompson rolled up his sleeves as he entered the crowded coffee shop near the military recruitment center. The summer heat made his long-sleeved shirt uncomfortable, but he had learned to live with small discomforts. At 28, Marcus had built a quiet life working as a maintenance supervisor at a local college. His days were filled with fixing broken pipes, replacing light bulbs, and ensuring everything ran smoothly on campus. Most people who met Marcus saw a soft-spoken man with calloused hands and an easy smile. He never talked much about his past, preferring to listen when others shared their stories. His co-workers knew him as someone reliable, someone who showed up early and stayed late when needed. The students barely noticed him as he went about his work, just another face in the background of their college experience. What they didn't know was that Marcus carried secrets beneath his rolled-up sleeves. Dark ink covered most of his forearms, carefully hidden under fabric. The tattoos weren't decorative art or symbols of rebellion. They were memories etched in skin, each one telling a story of brotherhood, sacrifice, and missions that most people couldn't imagine. The coffee shop buzzed with conversation as Marcus stood in line. Behind him, a group of young men talked loudly about their plans to join the military. They were fresh out of high school, full of energy and dreams of adventure. Their voices carried the excitement of youth, mixed with nervousness about the unknown future ahead of them. "I heard Navy SEAL training is impossible," one of them said, his voice filled with both fear and fascination. "Only the toughest guys make it through." "My cousin tried it," another added. "He quit after 2 weeks, said it was worse than anything he could imagine." Marcus listened quietly, remembering his own journey to that elite brotherhood. The memories came flooding back. Endless hours of physical torture disguised as training. Nights when sleep seemed like a luxury he'd never experience again, and moments when quitting felt like the only sane choice. But he also remembered the bonds formed in that crucible, friendships forged in circumstances that revealed the true character of every man who attempted the journey. The barista called his order, and Marcus moved to collect his coffee. As he reached for the cup, his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing just a hint of the intricate tattoo work beneath. The eagle, globe, and anchor were barely visible, but to anyone who knew what to look for, they told a complete story. An elderly man at the nearby table caught sight of the tattoo. He was dressed in a worn veteran's cap and had the weathered look of someone who had seen his share of military service. His eyes widened slightly as he recognized the significance of what he had glimpsed. Without saying a word, he gave Marcus a small nod of understanding, one warrior acknowledging another. Marcus returned the nod and found a quiet corner table where he could drink his coffee in peace. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through messages from his current life, work schedules, maintenance requests, and reminders about weekend plans with friends who knew nothing of his military background. This compartmentalization had become second nature to him. The man who could lead soldiers through impossible missions and the man who fixed broken air conditioning units existed in separate worlds. The group of potential recruits continued their animated discussion about military life, their voices growing louder as their excitement built. Marcus smiled to himself, remembering his own naive enthusiasm at that age. He had been just as eager, just as certain that he understood what military service would demand of him. Reality had been far different from his expectations, both harder and more rewarding than anything he had imagined. One of the young men mentioned wanting to earn the respect that came with serving in special operations. Marcus's hand unconsciously moved to his forearm, where beneath the fabric lay tattoos that represented exactly that kind of respect. But he had learned that real respect wasn't something you demanded or displayed like a badge. It was something earned through actions, often in moments when no one was watching, when doing the right thing was harder than walking away. As he finished his coffee, Marcus noticed a flyer on the bulletin board advertising a local veterans support group meeting. The organization was looking for volunteers to help younger veterans transition back to civilian life. For months, Marcus had considered getting involved but had held back, preferring the anonymity of his current existence. The conversation behind him shifted to talk about the sacrifices military families made, the long deployments, and the difficulty of maintaining relationships under such pressure. Marcus knew these challenges intimately. His own marriage hadn't survived his military career, and the isolation that followed had nearly consumed him. Finding purpose in civilian life had taken years, and even now, he sometimes felt like he was playing a role rather than living authentically. A notification on his phone reminded him of a work meeting scheduled for that afternoon. The college was planning renovations to the student center, and as the maintenance supervisor, Marcus would need to coordinate with contractors and ensure minimal disruption to campus life. It was important work that mattered to the daily lives of thousands of students, but it felt worlds away from the life-and-death decisions that had once defined his existence. As he prepared to leave the coffee shop, Marcus overheard one of the recruits expressing doubt about whether he was tough enough for military service. The young man's voice carried genuine concern, and Marcus felt a familiar urge to offer guidance, to share hard-won wisdom that might help someone else navigate the challenges ahead. Instead, he remained silent, finishing the last of his coffee and gathering his things. The invisible boundary he had constructed between his past and present held firm, even when he sensed he might be able to help someone else. This protective distance had become both his shield and his prison, keeping painful memories at bay while also preventing him from fully connecting with others who might understand his journey. Walking back to his truck, Marcus passed the military recruitment center, where official posters promised adventure, education, and the chance to serve something greater than oneself. The images showed young men and women in pristine uniforms, their faces filled with determination and purpose. Marcus remembered posing for similar photos, remembered believing in the simple narrative they presented. The truth, he had learned, was far more complex. Military service had given him incredible experiences, had tested and expanded his capabilities in ways he never could have imagined. It had also left him with invisible wounds, with memories that surfaced at unexpected moments, and with a sense of displacement that civilian life couldn't quite address. Driving back to campus, Marcus thought about the young men in the coffee shop and their dreams of military glory. Part of him wanted to warn them about the realities they would face, while another part respected their right to discover those truths for themselves. Every person's military journey was unique, and what had been devastating for one might be transformative for another. His radio crackled with a maintenance request from the dormitories. A pipe had burst in one of the buildings, and students were unable to access their rooms. Marcus acknowledged the call and redirected his route, shifting his focus back to the immediate demands of his civilian life. These problems were concrete, solvable, and provided a sense of accomplishment that helped fill the void left by his more dramatic past. As he pulled into the campus parking lot, Marcus caught sight of his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face looking back at him appeared calm, competent, and unremarkable. It was the face of a man who had successfully reinvented himself, who had found a way to build meaning from ordinary tasks and quiet service. But beneath the surface, beneath the rolled-up sleeves and the carefully maintained anonymity, lived experiences that had shaped him in profound ways. The tattoos hidden under his clothing were more than decorative art. They were a permanent record of transformation, of brotherhood tested under fire, and of a version of himself that felt simultaneously foreign and fundamental. The pipe repair would take most of the afternoon, but Marcus didn't mind. Physical work provided a meditative rhythm that helped quiet the more restless parts of his mind. As he gathered his tools and headed into the dormitory, he carried with him all the contradictions of his existence: the warrior and the maintenance man, the leader and the follower, the man who had seen too much and the man who now chose to see beauty in simple, everyday tasks. The students whose rooms had been affected by the pipe burst gathered in the hallway, some frustrated by the inconvenience, others curious about the repair process. Marcus smiled and assured them he would have everything fixed quickly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations, even if the stakes were now considerably lower than they once had been. 3 weeks after the coffee shop encounter, Marcus found himself in an unfamiliar situation that would shatter the careful boundaries he had built around his identity. The college was hosting its annual Veterans Day ceremony, and as the maintenance supervisor, Marcus was responsible for ensuring the auditorium was properly set up for the event. The ceremony was scheduled to honor local veterans and their families, with guest speakers from various branches of the military. Marcus had coordinated these types of events before, always working behind the scenes while others took center stage. His role was simple: make sure the microphones worked, the lighting was adequate, and the facility was clean and welcoming. As veterans and their families began arriving for the evening ceremony, Marcus performed his final checks of the audio equipment. The auditorium filled slowly with men and women of various ages, some wearing pieces of their old uniforms, others displaying military insignia on caps or jackets. The atmosphere was respectful and subdued, filled with the kind of quiet pride that comes with shared sacrifice. Marcus noticed several older veterans helping each other navigate the steps into the auditorium. Some walked with canes, others moved carefully due to invisible injuries that had never fully healed. Their presence reminded him of the long-term costs of military service, costs that extended far beyond the immediate dangers of combat deployments. The program began with a local high school choir singing patriotic songs, their young voices filling the space with earnest emotion. Marcus stood at the back of the auditorium, monitoring the sound levels and ensuring everything proceeded smoothly. From his position, he could observe the audience without drawing attention to himself, maintaining the professional distance that had become his default mode of operation. The evening's keynote speaker was introduced as Rear Admiral Jennifer Hayes, a recently retired Navy officer with a distinguished career spanning 3 decades. As she approached the podium, Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest. Something about her bearing, her confident stride, and the way she surveyed the room before speaking triggered memories he had worked hard to keep buried. Admiral Hayes began her speech with stories about the veterans in the audience, recognizing their service and sacrifice. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had led others through difficult circumstances, and her words resonated with the assembled crowd. Marcus found himself listening more intently than he had planned, drawn in despite his intention to remain detached. "Service members come from every corner of our society," Admiral Hayes said, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. "They are teachers and mechanics, doctors and farmers, students and grandparents. What unites them is not their background, but their willingness to answer a call to something greater than themselves." As she spoke, Marcus felt the familiar weight of his concealed tattoos, hidden beneath his work shirt and jacket. The Admiral's words about hidden service resonated deeply with his current situation. How many people in this room, he wondered, carried similar secrets about their past contributions to national security? The speech continued with Admiral Hayes describing her own career trajectory, including her time working with special operations forces in various theaters around the world. Marcus's attention sharpened as she mentioned specific operations and time periods that aligned with his own service record. The possibility of their paths having crossed began to form in the back of his mind. "One of the most remarkable aspects of special operations," Admiral Hayes continued, "is the way extraordinary individuals learn to blend seamlessly back into civilian society. Some of our most accomplished warriors now work in schools, hospitals, and businesses across this country, their past heroism known only to those who served alongside them." Marcus felt exposed, as if the Admiral's words were directed specifically at him. The description of hidden warriors struck uncomfortably close to his own experience of maintaining 2 separate identities. He shifted nervously, checking his watch and considering whether he could slip out to check on other aspects of the facility setup. Before he could move, Admiral Hayes paused in her speech and scanned the audience more deliberately. Her eyes moved across the assembled veterans, studying faces with the intensity of someone searching for something specific. When her gaze reached the back of the auditorium where Marcus stood, she stopped. For a long moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Marcus saw recognition dawn in the Admiral's expression, followed immediately by surprise and something that looked like relief. He felt his carefully constructed anonymity beginning to crumble under her steady gaze. Admiral Hayes smiled slightly, never breaking eye contact with Marcus, and continued her speech. But now her words seemed to carry a different weight, as if she were speaking directly to him about the challenges of transitioning from military to civilian life, about the difficulty of finding purpose after leaving behind a career defined by constant danger and high stakes. "Sometimes," she said, her voice taking on a more personal tone, "the greatest act of service is learning how to serve in a completely different way. The skills that make someone effective in combat, leadership, problem-solving, dedication to mission success, these same qualities can transform civilian communities when applied with the same intensity and commitment." Marcus realized that several audience members had begun to follow Admiral Hayes's gaze, turning to see who had captured her attention. The anonymity he had carefully maintained was evaporating in real time, and he felt both panic and an odd sense of relief at the possibility of his dual identity being revealed. After the speech concluded, Marcus busied himself with breaking down the audio equipment and cleaning up the space. He hoped to avoid any direct interaction with Admiral Hayes, but as the crowd began to thin out, he realized she was making her way toward him with purposeful determination. "Excuse me," she said, approaching as Marcus coiled up microphone cables. "I believe we may have worked together in the past." Marcus straightened slowly, meeting her eyes with the mixture of respect and caution that had become instinctive in situations that required him to bridge his two worlds. "Ma'am," he said simply, neither confirming nor denying her suggestion. "Operation Neptune's Gate 2019, Admiral Hayes said quietly, using a code name that instantly transported Marcus back to a specific mission that had tested every aspect of his training and leadership abilities. "You led the team that extracted those hostages from the compound outside Kandahar." The memory hit Marcus with unexpected force. He remembered the impossible complexity of that mission, the split-second decisions that had meant the difference between success and catastrophe, and the weight of responsibility for lives that hung in the balance. He also remembered Admiral Hayes, though she had been Captain Hayes at the time, and her crucial role in coordinating the larger operation from the command center. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Around them, the last few veterans and family members were making their way out of the auditorium, unaware of the significant recognition taking place in their midst. "I've wondered for years what happened to you after your discharge," Admiral Hayes continued. "Your service record was exemplary, and your leadership during that operation saved not just the hostages, but several of your own team members. When you left the Navy, you seemed to disappear completely." Marcus nodded, unsure how to explain the conscious choice he had made to sever all connections with his military past. The decision had seemed necessary at the time, a way to protect himself from memories that threatened to overwhelm his ability to function in civilian society. Now, faced with someone who knew the truth about his capabilities and contributions, that choice felt both validated and somehow diminished. "I needed to find a different way to serve," Marcus said finally, echoing the Admiral's earlier words about transformation and purpose. "This work, taking care of this place and the people who use it, it gives me something I couldn't find anywhere else." Admiral Hayes looked around the auditorium, taking in the evidence of Marcus's careful attention to detail in preparing the space for the evening ceremony. The sound system had worked flawlessly, the lighting had been perfect, and every aspect of the physical environment had supported the dignity and importance of the event. "You're still leading," she observed, "still ensuring mission success, just in a different context." The comment struck Marcus as profoundly accurate. His approach to maintaining the college facilities did carry many of the same principles that had guided his military leadership. Attention to detail, anticipation of problems before they occurred, and a commitment to supporting others in achieving their objectives. These qualities had simply found new applications in his civilian role. "The tattoos," Admiral Hayes said, nodding toward his covered forearms. "Do you still have them?" Marcus hesitated, then slowly rolled up his sleeves, revealing the intricate artwork that told the story of his military service. The eagle, globe, and anchor were prominently displayed, along with unit insignias, mission dates, and symbols that represented fallen comrades. Each piece had been carefully chosen to honor specific memories and relationships. Admiral Hayes studied the tattoos with the respect of someone who understood their significance. "These represent some of the finest service members I've ever had the privilege to work with," she said. "Hiding them doesn't diminish what they represent, but it does rob others of the opportunity to understand what true service looks like." As they spoke, a small group of veterans who had been lingering after the ceremony approached, drawn by curiosity about their conversation. Marcus felt his heart rate increase as his carefully maintained privacy began to dissolve completely. For so long he had controlled who knew about his past and how much they learned. Now that control was slipping away, and he wasn't sure whether to feel terrified or liberated. One of the approaching veterans, an older man with Marine Corps insignia on his cap, caught sight of Marcus's revealed tattoos and stopped short. His expression changed from casual curiosity to profound recognition and respect. Without saying a word, he came to attention and delivered a crisp salute that immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the vicinity. The gesture transformed the entire dynamic of the moment, shifting from a private conversation between two former service members to a public acknowledgement of military brotherhood that demanded response and recognition from everyone present. The Marine veteran's salute hung in the air like a suspended moment in time. Marcus felt the familiar pull of military protocol, his body instinctively wanting to return the gesture, but his civilian identity held him back. The auditorium, which had been nearly empty moments before, suddenly felt charged with an energy that demanded acknowledgement. The older Marine, whose name tag read Sergeant Major Rodriguez, Ret, maintained his perfect salute while his eyes studied Marcus's revealed tattoos with growing understanding. The SEAL trident was clearly visible among the other military insignia, and Rodriguez's expression shifted from general respect to something approaching awe. "Hoo-yah, brother," Rodriguez said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of shared understanding. "I should have known." Other veterans in the vicinity began to notice the exchange, drawn by the formal nature of Rodriguez's salute and the obvious significance of whatever was unfolding between the men. Admiral Hayes watched with interest, recognizing that Marcus was about to face exactly the kind of recognition he had spent years avoiding. Marcus felt the walls of his carefully constructed civilian identity crumbling around him. For nearly 5 years, he had successfully maintained his anonymity, allowing people to see only what he chose to reveal. Now, surrounded by fellow veterans who understood the language written in ink across his forearms, that control was completely gone. "At ease, Sergeant Major," Marcus said softly, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of command that no amount of civilian life could completely erase. The words came naturally, drawing on years of military conditioning that had become part of his fundamental identity. Rodriguez lowered his salute, but remained standing straighter than before, his entire demeanor reflecting the respect accorded to special operations personnel. "Sir, I served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. I've worked alongside some incredible warriors, but I've never had the honor of meeting a SEAL team leader in person." Word of Marcus's identity began to spread through the remaining veterans with the speed of military communication networks. Whispered conversations erupted around the auditorium as people shared what they had observed, and gradually, more veterans began to approach, drawn by curiosity and respect for someone whose service represented the pinnacle of military achievement. Marcus looked to Admiral Hayes, hoping for some guidance on how to handle the situation. His years of training had prepared him for countless scenarios, but navigating sudden recognition in a civilian setting wasn't covered in any manual he remembered studying. "You can't put this back in the bottle," Admiral Hayes said gently, reading his expression accurately. "And maybe it's time to stop trying." A younger veteran, probably in his early 30s, stepped forward with obvious nervousness. "Excuse me, sir. I was Army Special Forces, served in Syria and Afghanistan. My unit worked with Navy SEALs on several operations. I just wanted to say thank you for your service." The simple words hit Marcus harder than he expected. During his military career, thanks had been rare and usually came from people who didn't truly understand what they were thanking him for. Hearing it from someone who had faced similar dangers, who understood the real cost of special operations work, carried a weight that civilian gratitude never could. "Thank you for yours," Marcus replied, extending his hand to shake. The brief contact connected him to memories of countless similar exchanges with fellow warriors, moments of mutual recognition that transcended branch rivalries and unit affiliations. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who had been attending the ceremony to honor her late husband's Navy service, approached the growing group with determination. She had been watching the exchange from across the auditorium, and walked over with the purposeful stride of someone who had something important to say. "Young man," she said to Marcus, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had lived through decades of military life. "My husband was a Navy pilot in Vietnam. He used to tell me that the most dangerous missions were handled by people whose names we would never know, whose stories would never be told." She paused, studying Marcus's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize important details. "He always said those men carried the heaviest burden because they couldn't even talk about what they had done for their country. I think he would want me to tell you that your sacrifice hasn't gone unnoticed, even if it's been invisible." Marcus felt his throat tighten as Mrs. Patterson's words struck directly at the isolation he had felt since leaving the military. The inability to share his experiences, to process his memories with people who could understand them, had been one of the most difficult aspects of his transition to civilian life. "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus managed, his voice rougher than usual. "Your husband's service opened doors that made ours possible." The conversation attracted the attention of Dr. Ballard. Sarah Chen, the college's president, who had been speaking with other veterans near the auditorium entrance. As she approached, Marcus realized that his professional life was about to collide with his military past in ways he hadn't anticipated. Marcus. Doctor, Chen said, her expression reflecting surprise and growing understanding. I had no idea about your military background. The admission reminded Marcus that his employment application had listed only basic information about his previous work experience, with deliberately vague references to government service that hadn't prompted further investigation. Dr. Chen's university had hired him based on his practical skills and work ethic, never knowing they had recruited someone with his unique background. I prefer to let my current work speak for itself, Marcus said, trying to maintain some boundary between his professional and military identities. But this explains so much, Dr. Chen continued. Your attention to detail, your ability to manage complex projects under pressure, the way you handle crisis situations with such calm competence. The students and faculty have often commented on how safe and secure they feel knowing you're taking care of the facilities. Admiral Hayes smiled at this observation, recognizing the ways Marcus had translated his military skills into civilian applications. Leadership and protection instincts don't disappear just because the uniform comes off, she noted. They find new ways to express themselves. A group of college students who had been working late in the building began to gather at the auditorium entrance, drawn by the unusual crowd and the obvious intensity of whatever was happening inside. Marcus noticed their presence and felt a familiar protective instinct, wanting to shield them from any disruption to their academic environment. One of the students, a junior named Kevin, who had interacted with Marcus numerous times during maintenance requests, pushed through to the front of the group. Thompson, is everything okay? The question highlighted the strange nature of the situation. Marcus's two identities existing simultaneously in the same space, each demanding different responses and behaviors. To Kevin and the other students, he was simply the helpful maintenance supervisor who fixed their problems and kept their campus running smoothly. Everything's fine, Kevin, Marcus assured him, just talking with some veterans after the ceremony. But Kevin's sharp eyes had already noticed Marcus's revealed tattoos, and his expression showed recognition of their military significance. As a student studying criminal justice with plans to join law enforcement, Kevin understood enough about military culture to recognize the importance of what he was seeing. Those are SEAL tattoos, aren't they? Kevin asked, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Mr. Thompson, you're a Navy SEAL? The direct question from someone who knew him only in his civilian capacity forced Marcus to confront the artificial separation he had maintained between his past and present. Kevin's amazement reflected the gap between public perception of Special Operations Forces and the reality of how those skills translated to everyday life. I was, Marcus said simply, acknowledging the truth without elaborating on details that remained classified or too painful to share publicly. The admission rippled through the gathered students, creating a buzz of excited conversation as they tried to reconcile their image of their quiet maintenance supervisor with the legendary reputation of Navy SEALs. Some pulled out phones to share the news with friends, while others simply stared in fascination at this unexpected revelation. Marcus felt overwhelmed by the sudden attention from so many different groups. Veterans who understood his service, college administrators who were reassessing their understanding of his capabilities, and students who saw him as a living connection to military adventure they had only experienced through movies and video games. This is a lot to process, Marcus admitted to Admiral Hayes, his voice carrying the strain of maintaining composure while his carefully constructed privacy dissolved around him. The hardest part of leaving the military, Admiral Hayes replied, is learning that you don't have to carry the burden of your service alone. These people aren't asking you to relive trauma or share classified information. They're offering you the recognition and community that every veteran deserves. As if to prove her point, Rodriguez stepped forward again, this time addressing the entire group that had gathered around Marcus. Ladies and gentlemen, what we're witnessing here is something special. This man represents the very best of American military service, and he's been working among us every day, making our lives better without any recognition or fanfare. The sergeant major's words carried the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak about military excellence through his own decades of service. His endorsement seemed to crystallize the moment for everyone present, creating a shared understanding that they were part of something significant. Mrs. Patterson spoke up again, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. My husband would have said this man embodies what service really means. not seeking glory or recognition, but quietly doing whatever needs to be done to protect and care for others. The elderly widow's words created a moment of profound silence as everyone present absorbed the truth of her observation. Marcus realized that his attempt to hide his military identity had actually demonstrated the very values that military service was supposed to instill: selfless dedication to mission accomplishment and the welfare of others. Looking around at the faces surrounding him, veterans who understood sacrifice, students who were learning about service, and colleagues who were seeing him in an entirely new light, Marcus felt something shift inside himself. For the first time since leaving the military, he sensed the possibility of integrating all aspects of his identity instead of keeping them carefully separated. The moment was interrupted by the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. Dr. Dusty Chen had begun applauding, and one by one every person in the auditorium joined her, until the space filled with sustained applause that echoed off the walls and seemed to acknowledge not just Marcus's military service, but his ongoing commitment to serving others in whatever capacity was needed. The applause seemed to go on forever, each clap echoing through Marcus like a physical force he wasn't prepared to handle. He had faced enemy fire, navigated impossible missions, and made split-second decisions that determined who lived and who died. But standing in this auditorium, accepting recognition for service he had tried so hard to hide, felt more overwhelming than any combat situation he had ever encountered. As the applause finally died down, Marcus noticed that several people were wiping away tears. Mrs. Patterson had her handkerchief out, and even some of the college students seemed emotionally affected by the moment. The realization that his story had touched people so deeply forced him to confront how much his self-imposed isolation had cost not just himself, but others who might have benefited from knowing about his experiences. Admiral Hayes stepped closer to Marcus, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "I know this is overwhelming, but you need to understand something important. Your story, both your military service and your transition to civilian life, it's exactly what younger veterans need to hear." She gestured toward the group of people still gathered around them. "Look at their faces. They're not seeing you as some kind of superhero or movie character. They're seeing proof that military service, even at the highest levels, can lead to meaningful civilian careers that matter to real communities." Marcus followed her gaze and realized she was right. The expressions surrounding him reflected respect and admiration, but also hope and understanding. For the veterans present, he represented successful transition and continued purpose. For the civilians, he embodied the idea that heroic service could coexist with humble, everyday dedication to community welfare. Kevin, the criminal justice student, raised his hand tentatively. "Mr. Kepler, Thompson, could I ask you something?" Marcus nodded, bracing himself for questions about combat or classified operations that he wouldn't be able to answer. "How do you do it?" Kevin asked. How do you go from doing these incredible military missions to fixing pipes and changing light bulbs? Doesn't it feel like, I don't know, like you're wasting your talents?" The question struck at the heart of Marcus's own struggles with his civilian identity. For years, he had wrestled with similar feelings, wondering if his transition to maintenance work represented a failure to fully utilize his capabilities or a necessary step in healing from the trauma of his military experiences. At first, it felt exactly like that, Marcus answered honestly. "I thought I was hiding from who I really was, pretending to be someone smaller and less significant than the person the military had trained me to become." He paused, looking around the auditorium that he had helped maintain and improve over the past several years. "But I've learned that service isn't about the size or drama of the mission. It's about commitment to making other people's lives better, whatever form that takes." Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "In the Marines, we learned that every job matters to the mission. From the guy flying the helicopter to the person making sure there's clean water to drink. Civilian life isn't any different." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her expression thoughtful. "Marcus, I have to ask, when we hired you, did you deliberately hide your military background?" The question was fair but complicated to answer. Marcus had indeed downplayed his military experience, but not necessarily to deceive his employer. Rather, he had been trying to protect himself from expectations and assumptions that felt too heavy to carry in his fragile post-military state. "I wasn't trying to deceive anyone," Marcus said carefully. "I was trying to find out if I could build an identity that wasn't entirely defined by what I had done in the military." I needed to know if I could be valuable to people without them knowing about my past. And what did you learn? Admiral Hayes asked, genuinely curious about his conclusions after years of this experiment in anonymous service. Marcus considered the question seriously, reflecting on his experiences working at the college without the weight of military expectations. I learned that leadership and dedication show up in actions, not in titles or recognition, the skills that made me effective in the military: attention to detail, problem-solving under pressure, commitment to team success. These things translated directly to civilian work. He gestured toward the students gathered nearby. These students don't care that I led SEAL teams. They care that when their air conditioning breaks during finals week, I fix it quickly so they can focus on their studies. When there's a plumbing emergency in the middle of the night, they care that I show up ready to solve the problem. Mrs. Patterson spoke up again, her voice filled with understanding, born from decades of military life. My husband used to say that the hardest part of military service wasn't the dangerous missions. It was learning how to find meaning when the adrenaline and urgency were gone. Her words resonated deeply with Marcus's experience. The transition from high-stakes special operations to routine maintenance had been jarring precisely because it removed the intensity that had become his normal operating environment. Learning to find satisfaction in quieter forms of service had taken considerable time and self-reflection. A young woman named Sarah, one of the graduate students who had remained to listen, raised her hand hesitantly. Mr. Thompson, this might be too personal, but do you miss it? The military life, I mean. The question touched on emotions Marcus rarely allowed himself to examine fully. Missing his military career felt like both betrayal and truth, acknowledging losses that were complicated by the trauma that had made his departure necessary. I miss parts of it, Marcus said slowly, choosing his words carefully. I miss the clarity of purpose, the brotherhood, the feeling that what we were doing mattered in immediate, measurable ways. He paused, looking down at his revealed tattoos, each one representing relationships and experiences that had shaped him profoundly. But I don't miss the constant stress, the personal cost of that lifestyle, or the isolation that came with carrying secrets I couldn't share with the people I cared about. Admiral Hayes nodded knowingly. That's one of the most honest descriptions of post-military transition I've ever heard. Most people either romanticize military service or completely reject it. You found a way to honor what was valuable while acknowledging what was unsustainable. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of James Mitchell, the college's head of security, who had heard about the gathering and come to investigate. Mitchell was himself a veteran, having served as military police in the Army, and his expression immediately reflected recognition of the significance of what was happening. Everything all right here, folks? Mitchell asked, though his tone suggested he already understood that something important was taking place. Dr. So, Chen quickly explained the situation, and Mitchell's expression shifted from professional concern to personal interest as he learned about Marcus's background. Navy SEAL, he said with obvious respect. That explains a lot about how you handle security situations around campus. Marcus remembered several incidents over the years where he had assisted Mitchell with various security concerns: a mentally unstable visitor, a potential threat during a campus event, and a few situations involving intoxicated students that required careful de-escalation. At the time, Marcus had simply responded instinctively, but Mitchell had obviously noticed that his responses demonstrated unusual competence and tactical awareness. You never mentioned your background, Mitchell said, though his tone suggested understanding rather than accusation. I was trying to leave that part of my life behind, Marcus admitted, but I'm starting to realize that might not be possible or even desirable. The admission surprised even Marcus himself. For years, he had been committed to maintaining separation between his military past and civilian present, but the evening's events had forced him to confront the artificial nature of that division. Rodriguez stepped forward again, addressing the entire group with the authority of someone who had navigated his own military transition decades earlier. What happened here tonight? This recognition, this community. This is what every veteran needs, but most of us never get. He turned to Marcus directly. Brother, you've been carrying this burden alone for years. You don't have to do that anymore. The simple statement hit Marcus with unexpected emotional force. The isolation that had felt protective now seemed unnecessary and even harmful. Looking around at the faces surrounding him, Veterans who shared similar experiences, civilians who offered genuine respect and understanding, students who saw him as an example of service in action, he realized that his fear of exposure had cost him years of potential connection and community. Admiral Hayes seemed to sense his internal shift. "Marcus, I have a proposition for you. The Veterans Administration has been looking for people who can bridge the gap between military and civilian life, people who can help younger veterans navigate transition more successfully than most of us managed on our own." She handed him a business card. It would involve speaking at veteran events, maybe mentoring newly discharged service members, sharing your story with people who need to hear that successful transition is possible. Marcus studied the card, feeling the weight of possibility and responsibility it represented. For years, he had avoided any connection to his military past, but now he was being invited to make that experience the foundation for continued service to others who faced similar challenges. "I'm not sure I'm ready for that kind of visibility," Marcus said honestly. "You don't have to decide tonight," Admiral Hayes assured him. "But think about this. Your story, the whole story including your successful civilian career, it's exactly what struggling veterans need to hear." As the group began to disperse, people approaching Marcus individually to thank him, exchange contact information, or simply shake his hand, he realized that the evening had fundamentally changed his relationship with his own identity. The careful separation between his past and present had been shattered. But instead of feeling exposed and vulnerable, he felt oddly relieved. Walking back to his truck in the campus parking lot, Marcus rolled his sleeves back down but stopped halfway. The tattoos that had been hidden for so long seemed less like secrets to be protected, and more like stories waiting to be shared with people who could understand and appreciate their significance. The weight of hidden truth, he realized, had been heavier than the weight of recognition. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the possibility of living as a complete person rather than as fragments of identity carefully managed and controlled. 6 months after that Veterans Day ceremony, Marcus found himself standing before a group of 30 recently discharged service members in a community center meeting room. The transition support group met every other week, providing a space for veterans to share experiences, challenges, and strategies for building meaningful civilian lives. Marcus had never imagined himself in this role when Admiral Hayes first suggested it. The idea of voluntarily sharing his story, of making his military experience and civilian transition the subject of public discussion, had seemed impossible. Yet here he was, prepared to offer guidance based on lessons learned through years of struggle and eventual acceptance. The faces looking back at him represented every branch of the military and a wide range of ages and experiences. Some appeared eager and optimistic about their civilian futures, while others carried the hollow look that Marcus recognized from his own early transition period. A few sat with arms crossed, defensive against what they might perceive as another well-meaning but useless attempt to help them adjust to life after military service. "My name is Marcus Thompson," he began, his voice carrying the calm authority that had developed through months of learning to share his story. 5 years ago, I was where many of you are now, recently out of the military, struggling to figure out who I was supposed to be without a uniform." He rolled up his sleeves deliberately, revealing the tattoos that had become central to his identity integration process. "I spent years hiding these, hiding my military service, trying to convince myself and everyone around me that my past didn't matter to my civilian future." A young woman in the front row, recently discharged from the Marine Corps, leaned forward with interest. Her name tag read Corporal Sarah Martinez, and Marcus could see in her posture the military bearing that took months or years to fully fade. "What changed?" Martinez asked, her question reflecting the practical focus that drew many veterans to these sessions. "Recognition," Marcus answered simply. "Not the kind I was trying to avoid, but the kind I didn't know I needed. I learned that my military experience wasn't a burden to hide or overcome. It was a foundation to build on." Marcus had spent considerable time developing his approach to these discussions, working with counselors and other veteran mentors to understand how to share his experiences in ways that helped rather than overwhelmed his audiences. The key, he had learned, was focusing on practical lessons rather than dramatic war stories. "How many of you are working jobs that feel completely unrelated to your military experience?" Marcus asked, and most of the hands in the room went up. "I drive a delivery truck," called out a former Air Force mechanic. "Feels like everything I learned in the military is worthless now." I stock shelves at a grocery store, added a former Army sergeant. My wife keeps asking when I'm going to find a real job that uses my leadership experience. Marcus nodded, recognizing the frustration and sense of wasted potential that had plagued his own early civilian years. I maintain facilities at a college campus. For years, I thought that meant I was wasting my SEAL training, throwing away years of specialized skills and experience. The mention of his SEAL background created the usual stir of interest and respect, but Marcus had learned to acknowledge it briefly and move on to more universal lessons that applied regardless of someone's specific military occupation. What I eventually realized, Marcus continued, is that military service teaches you things that don't appear on any job description but make you valuable in every civilian workplace. Problem solving under pressure, attention to detail, commitment to team success, ability to adapt when circumstances change unexpectedly. He gestured toward the former mechanic. You think driving a truck doesn't use your military skills? How many times has your experience with logistics, mechanical troubleshooting, and time management made you better at your job than civilians who only know the basic requirements? The mechanic considered this, his expression shifting from frustration to recognition. Actually, I do handle root problems and vehicle maintenance issues that other drivers can't manage. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. Your military training doesn't disappear just because you're not wearing a uniform. It shows up in how you approach problems, how you interact with teammates, how you handle stress and uncertainty. Patricia Williams, the counselor who coordinated the support group, had been observing Marcus's developing facilitation skills with professional interest. His ability to connect with veterans across different branches and experiences had made him one of their most effective speakers. Marcus, could you tell the group about your college work? Dr. Williams prompted. I think they'd benefit from understanding how military leadership translates to civilian environments. Marcus had initially been reluctant to discuss specific examples from his work, feeling it might sound like boasting or oversimplification. But he had learned that concrete illustrations helped veterans envision possibilities for their own careers. Last month, we had a major water line break during final exams week, Marcus began. The entire dormitory complex lost water service, affecting 800 students during the most stressful time of their academic year. He described the crisis management process he had implemented, coordinating with multiple contractors, establishing temporary facilities, communicating with students and faculty, and managing resources to minimize disruption to academic schedules. The response had drawn on every aspect of his military training, from tactical planning to personnel management. The college president told me later that my handling of that crisis prevented what could have been a disaster affecting the entire campus, Marcus continued. But she said what impressed her most wasn't my technical skills. It was my ability to keep everyone focused on solutions instead of panic. Martinez raised her hand again. But how do you explain that kind of value to civilian employers who don't understand military experience? The question reflected one of the most common challenges faced by transitioning veterans, translating military achievements into language that civilian employers could understand and appreciate. I learned to focus on results rather than methods, Marcus explained. Instead of saying I led SEAL teams, I talk about managing complex projects under extreme pressure with zero tolerance for failure. Instead of describing combat operations, I emphasize experience coordinating multiple teams to achieve critical objectives within tight timeframes. A former Navy intelligence specialist named Robert Chen raised his hand. What about the psychological stuff? I mean, some days I feel like I'm pretending to be a normal civilian, but inside I'm still dealing with things that my coworkers could never understand. Chen's question touched on the emotional and psychological challenges that often proved more difficult than the practical aspects of career transition. Marcus had wrestled with similar feelings for years before finding ways to address them constructively. That's the hardest part, Marcus acknowledged. For a long time, I felt like I was living a double life, the person my civilian colleagues knew and the person I had been in the military. I thought I had to choose between them. He described his own journey toward integration, the gradual recognition that his military identity and civilian identity could coexist and strengthen each other rather than compete for dominance. The breakthrough for me, Marcus continued, was realizing that authenticity doesn't mean telling everyone everything about your past. It means not being ashamed of who you are or what you've experienced. Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, an elderly volunteer who had been attending these sessions to better understand her veteran grandson's struggles, raised her hand with the tentative politeness of someone speaking outside her area of expertise. Mr. Marcus, could you help us understand how we civilians can better support veterans in our communities? Sometimes I worry that we either ignore your service completely or put you on pedestals that feel uncomfortable. Marcus appreciated the question because it acknowledged the complex dynamics between veterans and their civilian communities. He had experienced both extremes, complete invisibility and overwhelming hero worship, and neither felt entirely appropriate or helpful. The most valuable support, Marcus said thoughtfully, is recognition that veterans are people who have had significant experiences that shaped them, but who are now focused on contributing to civilian communities in meaningful ways. He described his relationship with his college colleagues, which had evolved from cautious professional distance to genuine friendship, based on mutual respect and shared commitment to their work. They don't treat me like I'm fragile or damaged, but they also don't expect me to be some kind of superhero, Marcus explained. They value my contributions based on what I do now, while understanding that my background gives me certain perspectives and skills that benefit our team. The session was interrupted by the arrival of Admiral Hayes, who had been invited to speak about veteran career resources, but had arrived early enough to observe Marcus's presentation. She listened from the back of the room as he finished his discussion, her expression reflecting satisfaction with his development as a mentor and advocate. When the formal session ended, several veterans approached Marcus individually, with specific questions or requests for follow-up conversations. Martinez asked about educational opportunities for veterans interested in facility management, while Chen wanted guidance on translating intelligence experience to corporate security positions. Admiral Hayes approached as Marcus finished these individual conversations. "You've come a long way from the man who was hiding in maintenance coveralls," she observed with approval. "I'm still that man," Marcus replied with a smile. "I just learned that hiding wasn't protecting me from anything important, and it was preventing me from helping people who needed what I had learned." "What's next?" Admiral Hayes asked. "Dr. Williams tells me you're considering expanding your involvement with veteran support programs." Marcus nodded, describing plans to develop a workshop series focused on practical transition skills, partnering with local employers to create veteran-friendly hiring practices, and possibly pursuing certification as a veteran counselor. "The college has offered to sponsor my education if I want to formalize my counseling training," Marcus explained. "They've seen how my work with students and staff has evolved, and they want to support programs that benefit the broader veteran community." Looking around the meeting room, which was still filled with veterans engaged in small group conversations sparked by the evening session, Marcus felt the satisfaction that came from meaningful service. The work was different from his military career, quieter, less dramatic, focused on long-term development rather than immediate crisis response, but it carried the same sense of purpose and mission accomplishment. Admiral Hayes studied his expression with the recognition of someone who understood the journey he had traveled. "You found your way back to who you really are, didn't you?" Marcus considered the question, thinking about the integration of identities that had seemed impossible just months earlier. "I think I found out that who I really am never changed. I just needed to learn how to express it in a new context." As the meeting room emptied and volunteers cleaned up chairs and materials, Marcus rolled up his sleeves and helped with the practical tasks of closure. The tattoos that had once felt like secrets were now simply part of who he was. Visible reminders of one chapter in an ongoing story of service that had found new forms and purposes. Walking to his truck in the community center parking lot, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought him from hidden maintenance worker to veteran advocate. The transformation hadn't required abandoning his civilian life or returning to military service, but rather learning to see continuity where he had previously seen only disconnection. His phone buzzed with a text from Kevin, the criminal justice student who had been present at that first recognition ceremony. Kevin was now working with campus security while finishing his degree, and he had become one of Marcus's most reliable connections between his college work and his veteran advocacy activities. "Saw the news about the Veteran Support Program expansion," Kevin's text read. "Really proud to know someone who serves in so many different ways. See you Monday for the security training session." Marcus smiled, remembering his initial concern that revealing his military background might complicate his civilian relationships. Instead, it had deepened and enriched those connections, creating opportunities for more authentic and meaningful interactions. Starting his truck, Marcus thought about tomorrow's schedule. Routine maintenance rounds in the morning, a meeting with college administration about veteran student support services in the afternoon, and evening preparation for next week's transition workshop. Each activity was connected to all the others, different expressions of the same fundamental commitment to service that had guided his entire adult life. The weight of hidden truth had been replaced by the lighter burden of integrated purpose, and Marcus Thompson, maintenance supervisor, veteran advocate, and former Navy SEAL, drove home ready for whatever tomorrow's mission might require.